All right, I guess we will go ahead and get started, everyone. There are plenty of seats down front. This is being set up so it's a live stream, so when we have questions, if people want to come down to the microphone, that would be awesome. And I'll also say that the lights are blinding at the back, so it's really hard to see people at the back, so just either feel free to come down and join us at the front, or just walk down to the microphone to be able to ask any questions. So today we are excited to welcome you. We're talking about growing your academic career in medical school leadership. I want to also thank my esteemed colleagues for joining us as well. I'm Luan Lawson. I am the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education and Student Affairs at VCU School of Medicine. Everybody's going to be giving a much deeper introduction in just a moment. We have Dr. Keme Carter from the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine, Dr. Jaime Jordan from UCLA Ronald Reagan, and Dr. Jennifer Carey from UMass Chan School of Medicine. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We aspire to have disclosures at some point in time, but as you know, education is not always the best venue for that, but we will keep working on it in the meantime. And we want to talk about our objectives today. We want to talk about various medical school leadership opportunities, how you might go ahead and planning to be able to fulfill that, strategically thinking about how to balance and prioritize your efforts in working towards a career in medical school leadership, and then how do you actually leverage your interests and your skills for thinking about leadership positions and how they might align. And really, every medical school is organized in somewhat of a different structure, but a lot of times you will see that the dean's office oversees curriculum, student affairs, admissions, some type of either research or scholarship and discovery, as well as health equity, diversity, and inclusion type of categories. Offices, you will see them arranged very differently. There may be assessment offices that are different, but what you'll hear from us today is that really most of our careers kind of fit into one of these categories. And I really think that helps for thinking about a structure as to what are the opportunities. There's somewhat different skill sets that you need for each of those, and we'll talk a little bit about what our journey and path was to arrive at those, and hopefully help you think a little bit about how you can navigate your own career in the future moving forward.
All right, so I'm going to start by sharing my story. So my story began really after residency when I decided to invest some time and do a medical education scholarship fellowship, which was 2 years. And I think as part of that fellowship, I was really fortunate to be given some opportunities to take on leadership positions that I think were really important for my professional development. And so those were, I started out as the assistant clerkship director. And then I was also the director of asynchronous learning for our acute care college and a member of the advisory board there. And what our college is at UCLA, the students in their 4th year self-select into one of these colleges based on their intended specialty. So not surprisingly, the acute care college really focuses on students who are bound for things like emergency medicine, anesthesia, critical care. And I think the opportunity to really get involved in the medical school early on really helped set me up for some future positions. So I think having that role in the medical school and with the college actually allowed me to secure my next role, which was the vice chair of the acute care college after I finished fellowship. And then fast forward a few more years, UCLA actually decided to undergo a curricular redesign where we condensed all of our preclinical material into the first year. And as part of that, the school decided that they needed a group of core educators from diverse specialties, and we named this the Educators for Excellence. And their role was really to facilitate small groups of students in learning clinical application content. And so we would work with our students twice a week and then serve as longitudinal coaches, essentially, for them during their 4 years. And then just probably 2 years ago now, actually, I was selected as the director of discovery, which is another new component of this curricular redesign, and is essentially it makes up most of the MS3 year, and it's really focused on an in-depth scholarly experience. So what I'm currently doing now is having the opportunity to help build this new curriculum and serve as course director for discovery, and I'm maintaining my roles as the vice chair for the acute care college and an educator for excellence. All right, so some skills that I think were really instrumental in securing and maintaining these roles and doing them well, I think is just some foundational knowledge in curriculum design and program administration. So things like learning theory, how to assess learners, how to do program evaluations. Really trying to figure out and understand learner needs or know a way to go about identifying those needs, I think was also really important. And I think the last one here, honestly, just really developing excellent organizational and project management skills. When you're trying to juggle, multiple roles with varying levels of responsibility or try and execute huge tasks like a curricular redesign, I think having those project management skills really allows you to get things done. And I think that's something that my leadership has really valued in me. In terms of things that I did to try and build and develop these skills, like I mentioned, I invested time up front. So I put a lot of time and energy into my fellowship. And then actually a few years down the line, after I had been serving as faculty, I figured out that I still had some significant holes in my knowledge. And so I decided to go back to school, and I did a Master's of Education, really focused on social research methods and program evaluation, actually. And again, I felt that that skill building was really necessary to allow me to do my work better and also more independently. And I think along the way, I've been really fortunate to have great mentorship, starting first with my fellowship director, who really encouraged me to participate in national committees and volunteer for projects. And that allowed me to really meet and collaborate with a lot of outstanding educators and learn from them along the way. And I think all of these sort of diverse experience with varied types of learners has really helped me build my skills and expertise in a number of different areas.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Carey from UMass. And I finished my residency and decided to do a toxicology fellowship. So in my toxicology fellowship, I gained a lot of really important skills, teaching, learning, and some research. After I finished my toxicology fellowship, I stayed on as academic faculty at UMass. And then I had the opportunity, I was asked to take over for one of our first and second year medical courses when someone left. And so I was the interim director for that course, and then after that, I stayed on as the full-time course director. And so that opportunity really opened up a lot of doors for me and really has kind of led me to where I am today. So once I started teaching and getting involved in the medical school, I was then asked to be the division director for undergraduate medical education in our department. And with that, I also took over for our clerkship and our sub-internship as well. And so I've had the opportunity to work throughout the medical school in various different forms, teaching first, second year, fourth year medical students, and I see the third years here and there. And then just as in my role for undergraduate medical education, I interface with the students in various different ways as well, including overseeing EMIG and those types of activities. So I've been doing that role for several years now, and then a few years ago, I decided that we should have the opportunity to open a fellowship, a medical education fellowship at our institution, and at that time I applied for it and became the fellowship director for that as well. So in terms of the skills that are needed to do these things, so curriculum development, as Jaime just mentioned, is really important. And just really understanding the needs of your students and the different needs of your students and being able to modify and adapt your curriculum to be able to reach all of your learners. It's a really, really important skill to have. Networking, so getting to know people in your institution. Networking comes in different shapes and sizes, but getting to know the deans, the other faculty, the students, the administration, and really developing relationships with those folks is important because as new opportunities arise, that's when they'll reach out to you. And so I've been put on committees and asked to do curricular redesigns at our institution because people know me and have worked with me along the way. Knowledge of learner-centered teaching, I kind of mentioned with the curriculum development, but really, again, being aware of the needs of your students is key. Project management, so that comes in a lot of different forms as well. So in terms of the projects that I manage, it's going to be curriculum design, curriculum development, mentoring students, junior faculty, and some research and research projects as well. And so, in order to gain some of those skills, I didn't do a medical education fellowship, and I didn't get a master's in education, but I did seek out opportunities to gain some of those skills. So I participated in the Harvard Macy Scholars Program, and then a few years back, 2 years ago now, I did the Armed MAEd program, which is another excellent program for people who are interested in medical education research. And so actually, and there's a lot of other opportunities at my institution that I took advantage of as well. We have a junior faculty development program. And just identifying gaps in my training and looking for ways to fill those gaps is something that I continuously do. And then accepting challenges. So I always say, bring it on. There's, what project can I take on? What can we do? What can we identify that needs to be improved? And so I really try and think big and don't take no for an answer if anybody tells me we can't do it. I always think that there's opportunity for improvement and changes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Keme Carter, and my academic home lies mostly in the admissions unit of the medical school, as well as health equity, diversity, and inclusion unit as well. So I serve as the Associate Dean for Admissions at the University of Chicago and the Associate Vice Chair of DEI Education within our department. And I started as a clerkship director, and I think that a lot of us have that in common. I did not anticipate transitioning into the admissions unit, but what I was is very open to opportunities and understanding what other people saw in me that I didn't yet see in myself, and I think that's a critical piece of information that I would have integrated earlier into my career if possible. But I started as a clerkship director. I loved it. I had a captive audience. I have a blank slate on which to create and innovate and write about what I was doing and show impact in that way and talk about it on a national scale. But all the while, I was actually refining my mission within medical education. Who did I want to be? What was I proud of? What do I value? And how do I, when I'm all finished with this work, how can I say I left it better than when I found it? And my dean at that time, as she saw that my heart and my values lied with really shaping the physician workforce to meet the needs of our diverse communities, she actually thought that I would be well suited to take on the role of assistant dean for admissions. And I, again, was not really thinking that. I thought I would be going in more of the curriculum route. But I took on the role of assistant dean for admissions, and I had a wonderful mentor who was in the associate dean for admissions, who was in the process of retiring, and he mentored me really well, and he also gave me the freedom and the latitude to start working on initiatives that were in line with what I felt and with I think not just what I felt, but what the nation needs in terms of shaping this physician workforce. So I was able to eventually come on as Associate Dean for Admissions, and it's actually been one of my life's greatest joys to help play a small part in developing and choosing the physicians who will care for the patients across the country. So there were some necessary skills that I did not learn early on. Team and brand management. So marketing is a big part of my job. I had to understand what was the medical school brand, what was our mission, did that need to change at all? Should we be shaping or refining that mission? But ultimately I learned how to leverage a mission to attract aligned students. And so that brand management became and is still a very, very big part of my job. Budget management and how to operationalize a budget. I had no idea that amongst medical schools, actually 40% of the operating budget is managed by the Associate Dean for Admissions and the Directors of Financial Aid, and I oversee both of those units. And so learning how to operationalize a budget and distribute scholarship money equitably to make a medical education accessible for communities across the students in communities across the country was something that I learned. Knowledge of best practices in recruitment, obviously, is something that I had to refine. And then understanding how to keep a pulse on workforce needs and threats. There are many emerging, as you may already know, like the Supreme Court's coming down with a ruling next month. So there are all of these threats and needs that emerge and constantly change, and keeping a pulse on that has been a necessary skill in my work. So I developed these skills first by working in small team leadership experience. That actually, I had the opportunity to do that with my clerkship team. The clerkship role gave me visibility, but also access to senior leaders that have mentored and coached me. That was necessary. I gave my service time to UME and GME selection committees before I actually got FTE to work in those roles. And we'll talk about that, but you do have to decide what you're going to give your service to and what you actually expect compensation from. But serving on those committees was necessary for me to develop those skills. And then finally, just work experience with UME learners, understanding the learning environment has been critical to even my role as a physician who is working in admissions.
And so I probably actually had a slightly different path. I started out as a community EM physician, really with no desire, no sort of thinking about working within academic medicine. And it really took me about 4 years to figure out that this wasn't quite what I thought it would be. Actually, I returned to my home community thinking this was a way to really give back to people who had supported me along the way. And I would describe my career as a series of field promotions. This sounds so well-intentioned, and I would say that my life probably happened. I would like to think that there was planning to it, but really I think a lot of opportunities and how to capitalize on those opportunities. And so I started out as a clerkship director, largely, so after I returned to academics, I told my then chair, I want no part of research and I want no part of administration whatsoever. And then something happened. I saw myself really as a clinical educator for residents, really thinking about being able to be the conduit between what do you do at the academic medical center and how does that translate when you don't have all of those resources in the community. And very rapidly, really as the result of a colleague becoming critically ill, getting intubated in the emergency department, I got a phone call while presenting research with a resident in Italy that I needed to be the clerkship director and start the next day. And so that I rapidly discovered that I was ill prepared for the role, but was really an opportunity for growth experiences. Got me involved in curriculum, became involved in curriculum committees, and then sort of worked my way through the medical education side and the curriculum development side. I would say that a lot of those things really focused around what many of us do well as emergency medicine physicians, and that is seeing problems and coming up with solutions for those problems. I think one of the places that we are sometimes challenged is the ability to really think strategically, that's sort of 5 years out and what's our goal and how do we manage both sort of what we do best, which are immediate fixes, with navigating the how do we really plan and try to be strategic within the future. For me, one of the things that I think really came about that was helpful, maybe not always enjoyable, was the accreditation side of things. Had a lot of my very first LCME accreditation visit was in the midst of us going from being an elective clerkship to a required clerkship, and all of a sudden I was sucked into that, knowing nothing whatsoever. And so it was a sort of a baptism by fire along the way. And in that role, I really actually learned that I knew nothing about teaching. My parents were school teachers, and that was probably about as good as it got. So I went back and also got my master's in adult education. I did the teaching fellowship, really CDEM was such a powerful motivator for me, because it also helped think about, you're not suffering in isolation, which sometimes when you're trying to think about how do you solve things, how do you look at them as opportunities, and really being able to network with the people around me was incredibly impactful. Personnel management was something that we are not really trained well how to do, and so that is a necessary skill, and yet is not something that is naturally included in how do you actually navigate how to train your executive admin and how to do things, and how do you actually give up some of that control, which I had not given up along the way, as well as the budget piece of that. And so really looking for opportunities to be able to investigate those early, I think would have been helpful. Fortunately, I too had a mentor who I was looped in when I was the curricular dean to think about, okay, how does our educational RVU system work? How do we actually parse this out? And so I was really able to take that and be able to build on it in terms of my role now, where I actually manage the entirety of the teaching budget for the UME curriculum. I too would say I said yes to a lot of things, and not things that I always was really excited about saying yes to. And so you do have to navigate what is that time, but it really opened up a tremendous number of opportunities for me that I would not have considered before. And whether that was serving on admissions committee, I mean, one of the very first tasks that I was given was actually doing a grand round series within the department, and it was not a topic area that I was particularly excited about, but that gave me some of those skills to be able to build over time. And so I would say the other thing is there's plenty of opportunities to learn these things. You don't always have to have the skill set at that moment in time, but being able to recognize where there are gaps and then to be able to go out and find solutions to those has been tremendously helpful for me as well.
Okay, so this is going to be just a little bit of guided reflection that we would like you to engage in. So there is this paper that I always refer to in academic medicine by Chan et al., and it was called Finding Vitality in Academic Medicine. And it is something that I refer to consistently mostly at decision points in my career. And what that paper really highlights is that really there has to be some level of overlap in your mission, your values, and your goals, and that of the leadership to which you report, as well as the institution in which you spend most of your professional time. Okay, so it is incredibly important for us to think about our values, our mission, and our goals, those three things distinctly, recognizing that they will evolve. You have to actually take stock of them from time to time. So just for a minute, just consider, all of you, what your mission is, what your values are as a human and as an educator, and what do you aspire to do? What is your blue sky dream job? So consider that just for a moment. I'm going to pause here while you do that. Okay, so you know yourselves really well now, right? I've given you time to think about those values, the mission, your goals. You know, one of the things that I think it can be very unnatural to do is actually understand and communicate your value to other people. And this is definitely a skill that we need as we progress through medical education leadership positions. And so right now I'd like you to reflect on your existing strengths. What do you know you do well? What are the strengths of your existing skill set? And then I need to ask you, have you ever communicated that verbally
to someone else. So what are your strengths? What are your existing skill sets? And consider whether or not you have actually communicated that to another person. How many of you have actually engaged in a process of regularly reassessing where your professional vulnerabilities lie or the gaps in your skill set? Is that something that any of you have ever, we have a small enough group, you do regularly? I think, I will get to this question later, but I would have done that regularly. If someone would have told me to do that early on, I would have found great value in it. So right now, I'd like for you to think about that. Think about considering your ultimate career goals. What are the gaps that you can identify right now? And most of you aren't sitting close to one another, but I would like to encourage you to really share those vulnerabilities and gaps with other people, because that is how we remove some of our blind spots and get the input of other people that helps shape where we could see ourselves going. So this is a process that I have adopted in my own professional life. At least every 6 months, I'll go through a process of understanding what skills do I have, how are they transferable, and where are my vulnerabilities, and what am I doing right now professionally, and does that align with my values, my mission within my work in emergency medicine and medical education. So I encourage all of you to think about this periodically, recognizing again that it will evolve, it will change, but it can be incredibly useful, and it's very useful to share that with other people so that they can help you, again, remove those blind spots.
All right, so as you guys are all considering that reflective piece, we're going to shift gears slightly into our panel discussion. And again, I have a list of questions here for our experts, but we really want this to be, audience interaction and engaging and relevant for you. So if you have any questions about how to get involved with medical school leadership, please, we welcome you to come up to the microphone and ask your questions. And if not, you'll have to, get my questions that I've prepared. Do we have any brave souls? Yes. Thank you, Tichan.
Someone's gonna break this. Thank you very much for a very inspirational set of talks about your journeys. My question really is, when you're in the dean's office, because I'm an associate dean now, and one of my blind spots or vulnerabilities is that I haven't done a lot of advancement work. If I want to go up in the ranks, that seems to be a question that comes up a lot, is fundraising and exposure. Have any of you done anything to really understand donors, networking, and what did you do? Thank you.
I can speak to some of that. So prior to taking on my role, I was not familiar with, for instance, you mentioned donors, engaging with donors and learning how to ask for money, essentially. And this is something that I did not get formal training on, and I learned on the job. And I'm very comfortable with that, actually. I think it was important for me to see others do it, to understand what we are asking for and why we're asking, and to feel confident in asking others to invest in that vision. So I think because I had gone through a process already of understanding my own vision, the vision of the school, it became a very natural thing to be able to communicate that effectively to donors. And so that is something that I learned on the job. And I think that there are other things that I don't believe I can learn effectively on the job. I think I need to still advance leadership skills and continue to nurture that part of my skill set. And to that end, I'm always looking for formal, structured education on leadership development.
I'll touch on that as well. So that has never been part of my job until my most recent job. And so I think to me that is something that is really challenging. I did not know anything at all about. Our institution actually offers a philanthropy academy where they really are encouraging people to get involved and learn more about it. I think some of the challenges too are actually figuring out how do you navigate that and how do you work in partnership with whether it's a foundation or whatever your institutional structure is that supports that. Because there's also some potential stumbling blocks along the way. So what to promise people, what not to promise people, how do you keep people so that there's consistency in the expectations? And most of my work is around scholarships and support for students in the UME space. But that can be really incredibly tricky with donors, especially when they feel they have control over things. And so really figuring out within your foundation is how do you navigate that and work in partnership? I would say the other thing too is look at people who do it well. So I would describe myself as either an extroverted introvert or an introverted extrovert, somewhere in the middle. So for me, actually going to an event and trying to work the room, it is really, really challenging. But I try to look at people because part of this is how to actually make relationships with people, which I think I do much better sort of in a smaller group and one-on-one, and some people just gravitate to that larger setting. And so looking at people who do that well, and to me it's really about how does this fit the mission? How can I tell the stories of the students whose lives have been impacted? Because that really then speaks for itself and it doesn't require so much selling for individuals.
Thank you so much for that question. Anybody else? You can think about it and come up. Oh, great.
Okay, I guess I have a question. So in education, I feel most comfortable with emergency medicine, having been trained in emergency medicine. I see a lot of you guys were doing emergency medicine, started moving towards medical school or away from emergency medicine. How do you feel comfortable in doing that and still feeling like you're in your element and you're not giving up the thing that you feel most comfortable with, if that makes sense? I mean, it seems like Dr. Lawson, you fully are in the medical school, whereas everyone else kind of has a toehold still in both camps. I don't know if you could tell me your thoughts on that.
I will start and then we can. So for me, and I recently switched jobs within the past 2 years. So for me, I actually needed to still feel like I was part of emergency medicine. So I still do practice clinically, and that was a really important aspect for me. So I think for me personally, I became more comfortable because if thinking about that sort of learner-centered approach, that I didn't have to be the expert at everything, and that I really was there more as a guide and to facilitate. And then some of my other strengths were really more in policy and accreditation and some of those other pieces. So I didn't have to know how to teach all of the content. I just needed to be able to have the skills to get the right team of people around the table to be able to teach.
For me, although most of my time is protected by the medical school for admissions work, I actually still continue to co-direct the clerkship, and that has been a conscious decision for me because I want that opportunity to again be connected with the learner, to understand the way the learning environment is changing and what the needs of the learners are, to inform other parts of my job. And so although I don't dedicate as much time to the clerkship as I once did, I still have kept my role in the clerkship for those reasons. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, we have, as a specialty, I think we are a very close-knit community. And I think for me, even in my admissions work, realizing that emergency medicine shaped me. It shaped my perspective on teaching. It shaped, again, my knowledge of the different types of care that can be delivered to communities who are particularly vulnerable and what that means for the learner, all these things. But I think I would say that I still keep emergency medicine with me, even in the work that I do within the admissions unit.
So for my role, I spend about half of my time working clinically in the emergency department and the other half of my time in the medical school teaching either the preclinical courses or emergency medicine clerkship. And I think it's a really nice balance, actually, being able to do half my time here, half my time there, and kind of avoiding the burnout that a lot of people face when they're in the emergency department day in and day out. In terms of what I bring to my first and second year courses, my preclinical courses, I bring a lot of kind of emergency medicine-based concepts to them. The course is clinical applications, and so I have to lecture longitudinally throughout the 2 years in every single block. And I try not to always make my cases emergency medicine-based, but there's always a little flavor of emergency medicine in what I teach the students.
I'm going to add my 2 cents as well here. Again, I think some of what either innate characteristics that you have or the skills that you've developed along the way in terms of being an emergency physician will really help you succeed in these other arenas as well, right? We're really good at being uncomfortable, right? We're pretty comfortable being uncomfortable because that's what we face every day. So we can be brave and take on these new challenges because it's what we do, right? I think the other thing of just being somebody who can get things done, right? That also goes a long way in really, identifying yourself as a leader and succeeding in some of these other positions. And again, in the ER, we get things done, right? And then I think like Luan mentioned earlier, right? Being able to identify problems and come up with solutions like we do in our everyday clinical practice, that again is really a desirable skill in some of these medical school leadership positions. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I'm Emily. Thank you guys for being here. For context, so I'm about partway through my fellowship and I'm very interested in UME. I anticipate that when I start my first post-fellowship job, I'm going to be very excited and eager to get involved in as many things as I can to try and build connections and sort of get positions at some point, sort of move up within UME where I can. Can you all speak at all to how to find the right balance between overcommitting but being involved in enough things, and then also how to eventually transition that energy from kind of committing my own time to figuring out how to make sure it is compensated in some capacity?
That's a great question. I think one of the most challenging things about being a junior faculty member is you're going to be voluntold to do many different things, or that you might find opportunities that you just don't want to say no to or don't know how to say no to, but you do have to make sure that you balance these things out. One piece of advice I would give is if you are interested in a certain opportunity, talk to people who are on that committee, who have done that role in the past, and find out more about it. Find out if it actually aligns with your goals and your mission, and if it's something that you'll truly be interested in. As Dr. Carter said a few minutes ago, there's a balance between service and compensation. And so in education, there's a lot of time that we spend doing service work and we're not going to get compensated for. Some of those things actually do go on your CV and are really nice line items and things to talk about when you're going for promotion down the road or going for a new position. So really thinking about what is important to you, seeking out those opportunities, and then again, trying to learn more about some of those opportunities to find out if they're going to be worthwhile to you before you say yes.
I think early on saying yes a lot more than saying no will probably do you a good service. One, to help refine what it is that you really like, right? Sometimes you don't know if something is going to be aligned with your values, if you're really going to enjoy it until you actually try it. So I think for me, saying yes early on was really important and really helpful. And then again, as you sort of progress and you fine tune what is really your mission and your values and that alignment, filtering out some of those things that maybe don't align as well as what you're working towards can be helpful as well, without, overcommitting yourself, because you don't want to do things poorly. And I think that's the risk that we run. We want to say yes to a lot of things, but ultimately there's only 24 hours in the day and we have to use our time strategically. I think the other part of your question too that maybe our panelists can address in terms of negotiating for that protected time or looking for positions or roles that come with compensation or time, and how we can navigate those conversations and make sure that it's adequate for the work that's anticipated for the role. And maybe our panelists can speak to that.
In my experience, a lot of what I was negotiating for was informed by mentors and other people who had assumed those roles. So when I was negotiating for my assistant dean for admissions FTE, that was informed by the associate dean for admissions, who had insight into the amount of time that it would require. And I think it really is helpful to understand national benchmarks as well. And there are many different ways in which you can understand what seems to be the norm. And for me, I still love the AAMC meeting. I go every single year because I have found other specifically emergency physicians who do admissions work. And we are able to guide each other in understanding, how are we being supported by our institutions? And that gives a little bit more ammunition to go back to our institutional leaders and ask for what we want or what we think we need. It doesn't always work well, but it does sometimes in my experience. And I think so, making sure that what you're asking for is informed by those who are knowledgeable about your workload, but also trying to understand those national benchmarks to the best of your ability to be able to formulate a compelling argument for your leaders.
I would add on to that a little bit related to, for my position when I'm looking at or negotiating with people, or they're asking for opportunities, it's really so much easier if somebody actually has demonstrated some track record and some initial work towards something, to then be able to level up and say, okay, you did this, how do we formalize this in a way and we carve out some FTE time related to it. I think one of the really hard conversations for me personally is somebody comes and they're like, I want to do this thing and it sounds great, except that they haven't actually done any of the legwork, they don't have any sort of track record, and there's never enough financial sort of resources to be able to reward everyone that you want to. And so to me, I'm always thinking about, well, how do we be equitable in this process and making sure that people are getting compensated as fairly as possible or as consistently as possible. And so I think that really goes back to the saying yes and thinking about when you're saying yes, making sure that you're able to really follow through on that, because then there's nothing that's worse than you have a bunch of things that you said yes to but haven't been able to follow through. But I'd also say to really be intentional about what you say no to, because sometimes people say no to so many things that they stop getting asked to participate in some of these other aspects. Because if someone's told me no 10 times, why am I going to ask them for the 11th time? And so really thinking about that in your larger scale, sort of the values and what it is that you ultimately want to do and how that fits into the larger picture.
Yeah, so sorry.
I was just going to say, in terms of saying no as well, there's ways that you can say no. You can say, I'm really interested in this opportunity. I don't have the time right now because I'm doing these other things. If this opportunity still exists in 3 months or 6 months, please let me know because I'd be interested then. So there are times you're going to have to say no even if you don't necessarily want to, but you're not going to have the bandwidth to do all these things.
Now, I think some really important points here, right, in terms of there probably is going to be some component of service in doing things for the good of the school or the good of the mission or whatever it is that the project is working for. And then also providing some evidence, whether it be national norms, means, local or institutional norms. Also, just keep in mind, too, of keeping track of once you have a position, what you're actually putting in and what the whoever your leader is getting out from you in terms of productivity, and bringing that to the discussion as well. Again, I think evidence goes a long way rather than just saying that I need this for this, right? I need to see, like, this is going to take me this number of hours, this is what the norms are for this, these are the expectations that you're wanting me to meet, and these are the resources that I need to in order to be able to do this well. All right, I know we only have a few more minutes, so maybe I just want to give the panelists, is there a question? Sorry, please.
All right, I'll just squat. That's easier. So 2 questions. First of all, not a program director in that kind of role, but kind of about to start residencies. Curious about your thoughts on 2 questions. First of all, if you know that medical education is something that you want to get involved in down the line as you start to build your career, what kind of steps would you take during residency to do that and make that happen? And second, undergraduate medical education is changing pretty dramatically and has and will continue to do so over the next few years. As you stepped into leadership roles within your medical schools, how are you balancing flexibility to those changes in medical education with kind of maintaining your institution's culture and the things that are very valuable to, like, the undergraduates and the things that med students really do like about their institutions and why they chose that place in the first place? Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll take these one at a time. So want to do the first question in terms of how to get involved as a resident?
I think there are a lot of opportunities, I think, to get involved as a resident, and having somebody who is a point person in your department who works in the medical school is probably a good resource. So, for example, I would be that point person in my department. When residents have a desire to do education, I will potentially have them help me do a lecture for the preclinical students. I'll have them give a lecture for the clerkship or for the sub-I. I'll have them participate in simulation. I'll have them lead an EMIG event. So there's a lot of different opportunities that you can leverage in terms of getting a lecture, bedside teaching, and all those types of things.
I think there's also a number of committees that you can get involved in, and then SAEM is a wonderful opportunity too to be involved and to begin to make some of those connections at national committees. There's numerous ways, I think, to get involved nationally and to go ahead and begin to get your foot in the door, to begin to network and really think and explore what are some of those opportunities. I would say, don't feel so much pressure as a resident, though, because we also really expect you to be a resident, and it's really incredibly hard work to be able to balance all of those pieces, too. And so even just one small piece of that, I think, goes a long way, but at the same time, you shouldn't feel the pressure that you have to do all of these things, that really making the use of some of the bedside teaching and some of those other small pieces that you can really integrate first before you really think about building on, and then thinking about educational research projects or other things really could even go further beyond that.
All right, and then our second question. So how do we successfully navigate the changing tide of you mentioned UME, but also GME or any kind of change, really?
What I'll say is that it is incredibly important that a program, a school, an institution not lose itself. No, in other words, we must always know who we are, what we stand for, what we hope to do, the type of learner that we hope to graduate. Remaining in touch with that is incredibly important because medical education is always changing. It will always continue to change, and also learners are changing. And I think as a specialty, it has been said already that we are trained to adapt, We are trained to not be rigid. And so as medical education leaders, it is important that we are in touch with the changes that must happen. We do not want to remain stagnant nor rigid, but also understand what our resources are, the bandwidth that we have as faculty and as an institution, and leverage that to the benefit of our learners. And I think we're very fortunate to have a lot of medical education research that helps to guide where we are going and how we implement teaching methodology, how we can foster an inclusive and healthy climate amongst our learners, and maintain our vision and mission in graduating the learners who are prepared to care for our diverse communities. So I think that is probably how I would answer that on a very high level, and what I hope to continue to remain true to throughout, my medical education leadership journey.
All right, well, that's what we have time for right now in terms of our panel. I want to thank the audience for these really amazing questions and this great discussion from our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carey.
All right, so we have a couple of minutes left just to give you some kind of take-home key points. Things that we talked about and things we want you to think about going forward. So there are multiple pathways to medical school leadership, as you saw here today. And it's really important for you to consider how to navigate these pathways for you to be successful. So you want to align your skills with your sought-after role. So we talked a little bit in the guided reflection. What skills do you need? What skills do you have? What do you want to do? So really think about those things and be thoughtful about it, and definitely make sure you're reflecting to be sure that you are going to be able to move forward with your career in undergraduate medical education. So take advantage of stepping stones. We all talked about some of the different ways that we fell into different opportunities or different opportunities we sought after. And make sure that you're thinking about those things. Develop the skills that you need that will help you in your next role. So mentorship is extremely important. Having strong mentors and sponsors are really going to probably make or break your career. And so finding a sponsor who can really champion your abilities and advocate for you, and a mentor who can provide you wisdom and guidance and really help you on your journey and your pathway forward. All of these relationships that you're going to form are really instrumental in developing your career as a leader in education. So then, one really important thing is not to underestimate your worth. So don't be afraid to pat yourself on the back. Any accomplishment you have, no matter how big or how small, share those accomplishments. Make sure your chair, make sure your vice chair, your vice chair of education, program director, make sure everyone knows, your medical school deans, make sure they know what you're doing. And sometimes if you don't advertise these things and let people know, they're not going to know. So really be sure to really market yourself and advertise yourself. And then also, just to leave you with one last point, reach back and pull up. And so what we mean by that is as you're moving forward and you're taking steps to advance your career, look behind you, see the people who are in your footsteps, the residents, the junior faculty, and find ways to mentor them, find ways to bring them on your journey, and so that they can have the opportunities along with you, and make sure as you climb that ladder, you're bringing your people with you. Thank you.
Standing ovation, please.
Sorry, one last slide. So we want you to think, one more guided reflection. What is one thing that you will do in the next 6 months to close the gap that you previously identified?
Commit to it.
Thank you all.